Chapter 9. Gangnam Station 5. Hansu, who had entered the third floor, nodded at the light in the distance, a corridor that stretched far. In the space there, darkness was best suited for. A stationary train made hissing sounds as it shone its lights in the distance, and because of that, Hansu didn't need to search in order to find out what lived in this place. There was a snake that shined silver in front of the train, sleeping in a curled-up position. Barb Snake. Being soft and squishy, its main diet was normal animals, but it also ate deuterium metals as a secondary source of food. The deuterium metal that is digested within its stomach gets fused with the special liquid released inside its body and gets excreted between the scales, and this mixture dries in the air to cover the scales on its body. This guy is pretty fast. The slippery and hard scales combined with its speed makes it hard to catch. Hansu looked at his podao that had its edge almost dulled out. It was a good podao out of the ones that came out of goblins, and that was the reason why it survived until now, but it was quite lacking to go against those. It might be a little hard with this. Paralysis poison is only effective if the blade gets through. The weight and hardness are important, but first you need a sharp edge. Taesoon, who had a kitchen knife on his waist, backed off after seeing Hansu's look along with Sang-jin, who also had them. Hansu clicked his tongue as he watched Taesoon and Sang-jin. These guys need to go through some more socialization process. Try giving them to me. One isn't enough. They will likely break during the fight. At Hansu's words, Sang-jin looked at him with a slightly dissatisfied expression. You have yours. At those words, Hansu looked at Sang-jin with an amused look. It seems like this guy has the same idea. Hansu looked at Sang-jin and Taesoon and spoke. Are you guys trying to fight that? If they were to fight, he had no intention of asking them for their knives. He wasn't in a hurry, and there were probably a few left in the convenience store. He could just go back and get some. But unexpectedly, they wanted to fight, even though he thought that they would say they wouldn't want to. At that moment, Hansu looked at what they could see and knew what these three were thinking. Are they looking down on that thing? The barb snake was not really a large snake. Its length was only about 3 meters. The length was long, but its body was smaller than the land mermaid. The land mermaid's length was about 2 meters, but it had a lower body that resembled a grub, and these looked more agile. From a point of view, they don't really look formidable, but you can't assume things like that. This guy was more dangerous than all of the land mermaids above combined. Hard scales and fast speed, along with the strong muscles that can crush the land mermaid, as well as sharp fangs and grip strength that do not fit snakes. The barb snake was a predator that chewed upon land mermaids, and it was also smart, so it went for the weaker ones first. If these guys were to attack, then they would get murdered. It won't be a case where they will cry after getting hit once then absorb their gathered runes. Instead, their limbs will fall off. How do I handle these guys? There should be a different situation where you should have greed for runes. He had seen these types a lot, something that always happened during group hunts. They will forcibly join the hunt and try to receive some of the distributed goods. Ares was really good at persuading, but he wasn't really interested in persuasion. It was annoying, too. Normally, Ares would persuade, Keldian would threaten and control them with carrots and whips. If a negotiation failed to bloom, then Kangtae would walk out to force them off. And if that failed to clean things up, he went out. There was no need to see blood for these. Fun was fun and work was work. He was annoyed with dealing with kids that were a fourth of his age, so he gave them 2 options. I will give you options. First, I will get out and you fight them yourselves. Second, you guys get out and watch me fight alone. How do you want to do it? Taesoon got angry at the suddenly different attitude from Hansu. This bitch, we were hunting well together so far, but why is he suddenly like this? What his psychic powers were couldn't be grasped by him, but his reaction told him that what the snakes dropped was rather good. If they fought together and shared the drops, it would be good. But why did he need to get greedy to the point of excluding them? When Taesoon was about to say something, somebody quickly made their decision and spoke. I'll get out. What? The one who had made the decision was not he, but Sang-jin. Taesoon, who had been looking at Sang-jin with a flustered expression, scowled as he spoke. Hey, he's being petty and leave us friends out to eat them all by himself. Friend, it's a good word. He didn't decide to bicker over it, although his idea was that good things were shared together and hardships were gone through together. But it seemed like Tae-soon was using it in a slightly different way. I told you to follow me. I never said I was going to take you. At those words, Tae-soon looked at Hansu with a dissatisfied expression, and Mihi, who had been listening, spoke as she nodded. Let's stop. If Hansu is talking like that, then it means it's really dangerous. If he wanted to take everything, then he would have beaten them down, then taken all the runes. Even when Tae-soon was in danger after he got shot by the paralysis poison from the land mermaids, Hansu didn't talk like that. From the way Hansu was acting right now, meant that those scrubby-looking snakes were actually very dangerous. No. Since there was only one monster on the whole third floor, there was no way that thing was not strong. They had forgotten that for a moment due to greed. Tae-soon, who had started to come to his senses, calmed down, then started to take out the knives by in waist, while clenching his teeth. 6 of them. Hansu started to apply the poison from the land mermaid on the edge of the kitchen knives from Tae-soon and Sang-jin. Though that thing ate land mermaids, it was only because it was all digested within its stomach that could even digest deuterium. The land mermaid's poison, which was almost like a neurotoxin, had to get into its muscles to work. Hansu, who had numerous knives dangling from his waist, spoke as he looked at the 3. Hunt the land mermaids above. Hunting should be done constantly. Tae-soon looked at that Hansu and answered expressionlessly. Didn't you bring us along to take us all the way? Tae-soon grinded his teeth because he felt like they were used. Hansu smirked at those words. How did I not remember these amusing friends? He remembered clearly that they followed him in here, but it had changed to him bringing them here. You should really be lucky that Keldian didn't come here. Keldian didn't start here anyway. Hansu thought of Keldian, who was probably wandering around the purple region, and laughed. If it was Keldian, he would have made everyone above fall into a trap and take all there then started. And because of that, he was pushed out of returning here. He's always progressing forward, but the results aren't the best. Hansu looked at Tae-soon and spoke as he thought of Keldian. Go stay above. If you aren't lucky, then your eardrums will pop. And then Hansu charged at the Barb Snake. Kick! And then a frightening scream was heard, and the 3 who had been going back up realized at once why Hansu told them to stay out. Kyak! The Barb Snake's whole body squirmed as it expanded out, then compressed in an instant. And the air that was expanded and compressed exploded out of the Barb Snake's mouth with an incredible speed. Pang! An attack that had slight amounts of magic. The power wasn't that great, but it was a shockwave that had an impact that shook the opponent's balance by destroying their eardrums and cochlea. Ook! The body of the 3, who had been standing by the stairs, swayed for a moment by the impact force that rang throughout the 3rd floor, but Hansu already expected that attack after seeing its stomach and neck area. Good. The impact came through the hands that had been covering the ears, but the magic resistance came into play and reduced the damage. Hansu, who had succeeded in not losing his balance, quickly moved his hands from his ears and quickly attacked its momentarily defenseless body. To be precise, the scales were hard, but in between the scales there had to exist a gap from which the melted deuterium mixture came out. The knife with paralysis poison applied to it went in between the scales. Kyak! Good! 3 have been inserted. There were 5 major spinal nerves throughout its body that controlled its body. Hansu, who had touched the nerve after getting between the scales and its ribs, quickly backed off. Kyak. The Barb Snake, who was decorated with 3 knives within its body, twisted its body while making clattering sounds with its scales as if its body was harder to move than before. As expected, poison is the best in the beginning. The beasts and clans in the later stages had incredible amounts of resistance and regeneration, so most poisons basically had no effect on them. And if they also use skills, it gets even harder. But poison was one of the extremely effective methods against the monsters in the beginning, whose body were smaller and had less resistance. Even him, if he didn't have the paralysis poison, would have struggled a lot. Well, it's easy now. He was bitten on his arm when he first inserted the knife, but due to him raising his vitality, the wound would heal. Hansu charged again to insert 2 more knives into its body, then finished it off by stabbing deeply within the roof of its mouth with the last remaining knife. Hansu made a weird sound as he looked at the skill rune dropped by it. The skill rune which shone next to a few stat runes. Barb Snake's shockwave. To use this thing, he needed mana, so he couldn't use it yet. But in the case where he gained a mana rune during the tutorial, it would be an effective tactic in the beginning. Well, the visualization of it coming out of the body was not great, but as long as it was effective. As I expected. Due to it being a rather strong mob, the rewards are... And the 3 who had been standing afar off slowly crawled up and spoke out after seeing the skill rune on the ground. "Are you going to use this, Hansu?" Taesoon mumbled with a jealous-filled expression while looking at Hansu. Because the already strong guy would get a skill rune, so now he would start flying around. Damn it! At those words, Hansu shook his head. I'm not going to use it. He could only use 7, so why would he use something like that? What? Sangjin stood up and shouted, Then can I use this? If he wasn't going to sell it, didn't it mean he would give it to them? Taesoon scowled at Sangjin's shout and spoke. What would you do with it? It'd be better if I... What are you guys talking about? I'm going to sell it. Huh? I'm selling it. To the person who brings the most runes. If you buy it now, I will give a discount. 5%. Hansu shook the runes within his wrist and laughed. Can't we do an installment plan? If you guarantee it. Stand together. From his expression, if one person were to ditch, then the guarantees would have to sell all their gear to pay him back. The 3 made an expression as if they had chewed on crap. Chapter 10. Gangnam Station, 6. Have you decided? Whilst Hansu went to the convenience store to get something, he gave some time to the 3 of them to decide. And then Mi-hee nodded her head. Well, they probably know. You can realize just from Taesoon's situation. Stats were important, but skills were also very important. If that skill went into somebody up there, then the gap they created through diligent hunting could be crushed in an instant. And to prevent that, a trustworthy person of the 3 would purchase the skill. In conclusion, gathering up the runes has been beneficial. The runes that one person has is rather lacking to buy it, but it could easily be solved by lending. Hansu asked while chuckling, Whom was it decided to be given to? At those words, Mi-hee answered, It's me. As I expected. He guessed somewhat to this extent. Since Hansu saw Mi-hee pick up a mana rune earlier, no one was there to bicker who killed it, so from her taking it quietly, it seemed like she wanted to hide it. Well, the more hidden cards you have, the better. Whatever happens, that skill required mana. And because of that, for Sangjin and Taesoon, who had no mana, it'd be rather burdensome for them to invest in the skill rune, since they would never know when a mana rune would come out. But Mi-hee had already gained mana runes, and already confirmed that mana runes can drop from hunting. And from her situation where she had already confirmed the performance of the skill, it would have been very enticing, and the remaining 2 probably felt safer giving it to Mi-hee than giving it to others. Mi-hee borrowed the runes from Sangjin and Taesoon while shaking their hands, and then approached Hansu. Good, here they are. There are 3 each for agility and perception, and 7 each for stamina and strength. Since I said I'll give a 5% discount, I will only take 6 strength. You're quite thorough. Mi-hee looked at him with a slightly resentful expression. With that many stats, you could really become strong. She had fought a few times, but you can tell instantly. Not having runes is getting closer to death. Though she had gotten a skill, she seemed to have felt a little regret. And Hansu looked at Mi-hee's expression and chuckled. Don't think that it's too much. If you get into the habit of getting free things around here, you will die quickly. There is no trade in this world that does not cost in some way. Whilst chasing costless things, the cost will have stacked somewhere else and will explode. It wasn't somewhere like a Mart's food sample corners where no one would say anything if you eat and run away. Let's see. Since the Barb Snake was dead and the trade was complete, there was something he had to finish here. Hansu started to look around the train station. The existence of a barb snake means there is deuterium ore nearby. And indeed there was a few orange ores that sprouted out like crystals near the train station. Hansu grabbed them with his hands and rooted them out. Tududuk. It was very elastic despite it being a metal. It felt like pulling rubber. Hansu started to mold the deuterium with his hands, and the three stared at Hansu. Spike? Needle? Taesoon stared at the deuterium metal that was being molded like clay enthusiastically. Hansu left the needle that was molded to about 20 centimeters in the corner, went up to the barb snake, ripped off the scales, and started to rip its stomach open. Shook, it's here. Hansu made a delighted expression as he saw that the lysat solution sources hadn't dried up. Hansu took out all 6 of the lysat solution sources, then set up the burner and the pot and started to squeeze them above the pot. Plop, 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 plop. And soon the pot was filled with a green liquid. And when the liquid started to boil, he started to break apart the scales of the barb snake and started to throw them in. The hardness of the scales on Barb Snake's skin was extremely powerful, but it wasn't to the point where you couldn't break it. It's not good enough for a weapon. So he had to make a new one, in the same way the Barb Snake made his scales. Shockingly, when the hard scales entered the boiling lysate liquid, they all melted down, and Hansu, who had seen the green liquid slowly turn silvery, plopped down the deuterium metal he made once it turned completely silver. And soon a change occurred. Korurururuk, the deuterium metal, which did not exceed 20 centimeters and barely entered the pot, started to absorb the liquid aggressively. The needle, which had an orange tint, started to change its color very quickly as it absorbed the liquid, and soon the size increased gradually as well. The needle, which hadn't reached 20 centimeters before, was already over 1 meter long, and the width was as thick as a thumb. The end is a little blunt. He molded with all his might, but due to it being hand-molded as well as the enlarging process, the tip was a little blunt. Hansu held the needle with all his strength and started to grind it with the dull podao. Kududuk, kududuk. A hardness that barely peeled off when Hansu used all his strength while sweating intensely. Yeah, it should at least be that hard. Hansu made a satisfied expression as he was working very hard to grind it. As I expected, you guys are the best when I'm against strong opponents. If his attacks went into the enemy easily, then cutting parts would be good. But once you go against mobs that have decent amounts of physical resistance, cutting attacks don't work well. If one was confident in fighting up close, then rather than long swords that cut, needles and daggers that stab are much better in going through the enemy's defenses. While the area of damage is small and secondary damages such as bleeding is hard, if you know the weak points of the enemy and have the confidence to stab the weak point accurately, then the needle is the best. And if I need to go through his defenses when fighting him, it should at least be this much. Hansu thought of the opponent he needed to go against in order to obtain one of the 2 hidden pieces in the first tutorial area. Number 11 out of 134 weapons that can be created with the materials gained from the monsters in the first tutorial area. If you think about the alchemists went through a lot of trouble for a long time in order to create the best quality weapons out of the low quality materials that you gain in the tutorial area, it should at least be this much. If a rococo lizard or carnivorous sac came out, then he could create an even stronger 117 or 196, but Barb Snake wasn't bad at all. It would be rather hard obtaining a better weapon in the tutorial area than this. I should conclude now. Hansu, who had grinded the edge to a sharp point, took out the goblin leather he had saved, cut it into a long piece, and then applied the poison weakly onto it. Hansu nodded as he saw the insides of the leather melt slightly, and then wrapped the leather around the handle area of the needle. As he felt the right feeling of a grip in his hands, he made a satisfactory expression as he stabbed into the air. When he uses it later, he could apply poison or paralysis poison, depending on his preference then. Can't we buy that? Taesoon looked at Hansu's weapon with a greedy expression. If it's that much, then he was willing to buy it with runes. If Hansu struggled that hard to make it, then its hardness was incredible. As he was dissatisfied with the blades that went dull from a few strikes ever since a while ago, it could only be tempting to Taesoon. And then Hansu shook his head. From the start, you guys cannot use this unless you are high rankers, since the area of damage is extremely small, and something like this would be especially hard for you guys to use. Well, to be honest, it would depend on the user, so I would sell it. Despite that, he couldn't make more. I cannot make more because I used all the lysate solution. Tisk. Taesoon looked at the bottom of the empty bot and clicked his tongue. Hansu left them like that and moved inside the train. So if I get on this, then this should move. He just needed to get on the train and go receive the reward. The battle was over. The Barb Snake was already strong enough, but if an even stronger boss came out after getting on the train, how would a first-day adventurer kill it? Hidden piece just means it's a hidden mission and not an impossible mission. Hansu went inside the train leisurely and sat next to the pillar of the train, his favorite spot. And then he saw someone getting on after him. Hansu chuckled as he asked, "Why are you guys getting on?" And at those words, the three had a slightly befuddled expression. They were not stupid. An extremely suspicious train in the very bottom of the train station. And as if electricity was working in a devastated train station, the lights were on. A feeling of a jackpot. Even in games, when something like this exists, there will be a jackpot. No matter how one looked, it did not look ordinary, but Hansu, who had psychic powers, went in there, and even with a comfortable expression. They have never seen Hansu lose tension before a battle, so the chances of there not being any battles were high. Isn't following him on obvious? But they were surprised by Hansu, who had never said anything about following him, suddenly saying things. "This is one person only. Get off!" Huh? Only one person can get on. Hidden piece is only permitted to one person. The train was large, but it only moved when only one person was on it. It was made so that the difficulty is at where 20 people need to come down to clear, but only one person can get on. If a god existed, then he definitely had an evil hobby. That might not be the case, Sang-jin mumbled with a hopeful expression. And then Taesoon spoke after him. "And is there a rule which says you have to go? We've come here with our own strengths as well." "Magnetism, huh?" As Hansu glanced at the Barb Snake's corpse from those words, the faces of the three all turned red. Mihi was also making an embarrassed face, but didn't really stand on Hansu's side and speak for him either. "I go. You dummies." Hansu laughed inwardly. It wasn't that understanding did not exist. They probably got the idea somewhat. Whenever a chance occurs, you need to grab it. If you miss the chance because you are embarrassed or due to pride, then you will realize that that's a very foolish act. The three who were actually talking about it had their face reddened. They knew that they were pushing it as they were speaking, but they have not realized one thing yet. Oh, of course such a rule doesn't exist, since there isn't such a thing as an absolute law in this world. Then Hansu, who was holding on to the handle of the needle, grabbed the tip instead. And as the bulky handle spun upwards, the needle turned into a bat. Hung! Hoong! The bat in Hansu's hands cut through the air while making threatening noises. "You either get out now, or you deal with me first, then talk nicely with your lawyer later and find me in court. Choose one of the two." Hansu laughed while looking at the three. "Damnable bastard." Taesoon cursed as he looked at the train that was quickly making distance while making clunking sounds. It was extremely alluring, that thing that was at the end of the train station. And because of that, he pondered for a moment. Should the three of them try fighting him together? He even thought inwardly, surely he won't be too cruel. We're friends and we've come this far together. If they fought and won, they could take his weapon, and if they lose, they could beg for forgiveness. Not a bad gamble. And if I take all the runes on his wrist, and even take whatever is at the end of the station? It was basically a jackpot. The chance of success was low, but it was a low-risk, high-return case. Taesoon, who had finished his thoughts, tried to move his hands towards the kitchen knife on his waist, but gave up as soon as he saw his eyes. The only reason he was talking over it because they didn't act out. "Fucker!" He was laughing, and the way he was handling the situation was so-so, but his eyes were different. He was watching enthusiastically with eyes that could destroy someone's vitality, as if he was full of expectation to see how it was going to play out. Fuck. Fuck. He felt unfairness as he got scared from just his eyes, but he had to get off because he didn't have the courage to fight. "Let's go up. We should move too. Mihi opened her mouth as she looked at Taesoon. Sangjin and Mihi were making expressions as if this situation was supposed to play out like this. Taesoon spat out curses in his mind. You retards! This is why you guys aren't capable! Why are you making such an embarrassed expression? Anybody else would have done the same thing as him. I am not sorry. I am not embarrassed. Taesoon mumbled inwardly as he grinded his teeth, raised his body, and headed upwards.